Hello, classmates. My name is Ruth Adams, and today I would like to talk to you about the semicolon. I have always wondered how a semicolon can properly be used. And so I've done a little research, both with our textbook, which is a writer's reference. I also Googled proper use of a semicolon, and I found a humorous article on a website called The Oatmeal, and the title is How to Use a Semicolon, the Most Feared Punctuation on Earth. And here is the title page of that article. It says, using a semicolon isn't hard. I once saw a party gorilla do it. So between these two ideas, there is a semicolon to connect the sentence. So I'm going to get started. I have some information that I prepared from a writer's reference, but I also wanted to keep it light. And so I'm going to use information from the Oatmeal article as well. So as I read the assignment, once again, I immediately thought about the semicolon. I often struggle with the proper use of a semicolon. So today, I'm hoping to learn even as I am sharing information with you. As I mentioned, my references are a writer's reference and the Oatmeal's article, How to Use a Semicolon. According to a writer's reference, a semicolon is used to connect major sentence elements of equal grammatical rank. In other words, the semicolon can link two independent sentences. This is the answer to run-on sentences. There are 5 uses for the semicolon. The first use is between closely related independent clauses. Instead of merely stating the following, I'm going to read it from the screen as I switch the camera to the screen. Instead of merely stating in 1800, a traveler needed 6 weeks to get from New York to Chicago, in 1860, the trip by train took only 2 days. The proper punctuation for this sentence is in 1800, a traveler needed 6 weeks to get from New York to Chicago, semicolon. In 1860, the trip by train took only 2 days. As you can see, the comma between the word Chicago and in is replaced with a semicolon. The second use is between independent clauses linked with a transitional expression like still, next, or likewise, and between independent clauses linked with transitional phrases like after all, at any rate, or in other words. Instead of merely stating the following, many corals grow very gradually. In fact, the creation of a coral reef can take centuries. The proper punctuation is many corals grow very gradually, semicolon. In fact, the creation of a coral reef can take centuries. The semicolon was placed in front of the traditional phrase, in fact, to connect the two sentences. The third use is semicolons are used between items in a series containing internal punctuation. And an example of that is classic science fiction sagas are Star Trek, with Mr. Spock, Battlestar Galactica, with its Cyclones, and Star Wars, with Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Darth Vader. The proper punctuation is classic science fiction sagas are Star Trek, with Mr. Spock, semicolon. Battlestar Galactica, with its Cyclones, semicolon. And Star Wars, with Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Darth Vader. The semicolon separated the series of movies and their famous actors. Common mistakes we make when using semicolons between a subordinate clause and the rest of the sentence. An example is, the scientists were fascinated by the species Argyronea aquatica, a spider that lives underwater. The correct punctuation is, the scientists were fascinated by the species Argyronea aquatica, comma, a spider that lives underwater. These two clauses are not equal, comma, so a comma is the only punctuation needed. So that is my research from a writer's reference. I hope it was helpful. But as I mentioned, I also had references from the oatmeal, and I'd like to talk about that now because it's a little bit, it's more comical, and I thought it was a fun way to learn about the semicolon. So the title of the article, as I mentioned, is How to Use a Semicolon, the Most Feared Punctuation on Earth. Using a semicolon isn't hard. Semicolon, I once saw a party gorilla do it. So I'm going to turn the camera to the pages so that as I'm talking, you'll see what I am referring to. And this will help with the comprehension as well, because you'll see exactly where the semicolon is placed. Why? What's the point of a semicolon? The most common way to use a semicolon is to connect two independent clauses. For example, the ice cream truck man drove by my house today, period. He had big, hairy knuckles. The two statements are separated by a period. If read aloud, it would go something like this. The ice cream truck man drove by my house today, period. Take a breath. He had big, hairy knuckles, period. With a semicolon, however, it would sound like this. The ice cream truck man drove by my house today, semicolon. He had big, hairy knuckles. Because basically what we did was eliminate the pause between the two statements without using words such as and, but, nor, and yet. How? How do I use a semicolon? If you have two independent clauses, meaning they could stand alone as their own sentences, it's okay to use a semicolon. For example, my aunt also had hairy knuckles, semicolon. She loved to wash and comb them. Both of them are independent clauses, meaning that they could stand alone. But when you put the semicolon in between, it joins the two independent clauses. Don't use semicolons with conjunctions. Conjunctions are words like and, but, or, nor, for, so, and yet. My aunt's hairy knuckles are magnificent indeed, comma, but I have no desire to stroke them. A comma is used because there's a but separating the two clauses. When should I use a semicolon? I gnaw on old car tires, semicolon. It strengthens my jaw so I'll be better conditioned for bear combat. Use a semicolon when you want to form a bond between two statements, typically when they are related to or contrast with one another. In the example above, the relationship between gnawing on tires and combating bears is strengthened by using a semicolon. So the sentence was, I gnaw on old tires, semicolon. It strengthens my jaw so I'll be better conditioned for bear combat. Pause. Both bears and semicolons have a pause. Comma, brief pause. Semicolon, moderate pause. Period, complete stop. And here's the illustration for that. Okay. Next is internal. Use a semicolon to connect sentences that contain internal punctuation. When dinosaurs agree on something, comma, they'll often high-five one another, semicolon. Dinosaurs are all about high fives. If you use a comma in the sentence, it would have resulted in a comma splice. If you used a period, you'd lose the connection between the two clauses. So, when dinosaurs agree on something, comma, they'll often high-five one another, semicolon. Dinosaurs are all about high fives. Super. Use a semicolon as a super comma. While searching for a good place to get a unicorn burger, comma, I traveled to Seattle, comma, Washington, semicolon, Tokyo, comma, Japan, semicolon, and London, comma, England. Use a semicolon if you need to make a list of items that are separated with a comma. This often occurs when listing locations, names, dates, and descriptions. The end. The last, I'll hold up the last illustration of this article. I thought that this was humorous. It is informative, however, even with the humor, I still learned a lot from it. So I thought I would just give the lesson in a scholarly way and also in a humorous fashion, but it is relaying the same message. I hope that you have learned as much as I have about semicolons from this lesson, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you.